Yeah.
Okay, we're good to start.
All right, thank you. All right. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the Water and Sewer Board meeting to order. Brenda, can we start with getting a roll call?
Board Member Freeman. Board Member Jolie.
Present.
Board Member Kelly. Here. Board Member Mercier.
Present.
Board Member Ridley. Council Member Russell.
Present.
Council Member Ward.
Present.
Mayor Sierra.
Here.
Vice Chair Boreski.
Present.
Chair Moore.
Present. All right, wonderful. Thank you, Brenda. Next up is the approval of item 3A, approval of the minutes from the February 11th meeting of the board. Could I get a motion to approve?
So moved. I'll second.
Thank you. Any corrections or additions? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. All right, minutes are approved. Motion carries. Brenda, do we
John,
next up is the
I needed to abstain because I was not at the last meeting.
thanks, Ty. Appreciate it. One abstention. Motion still carries. For next up is the public forum. Brenda, do we have anyone from the public that wishes to address the board tonight?
No, we do not.
All right, thank you. Then that takes us on to new business, item 5A. And Sarah, I think you'll take it from here.
I will. Good evening, everyone. So this is the lead service construction contract renewal. Our contractor is AGL. So I will take us through the renewal, but provide a little background and history first. Our lead reduction program kicked off March 2023 with hiring Hazen as our program manager. We initially developed a service line inventory in that fall to begin then our field verification of lead service lines across the city. It also informed our application for the state revolving fund, which was submitted in December 2023. That funding was closed in May of 2024. In January of 2024, we posted the request for proposal for a lead program or lead construction replacement crew. That contract was awarded to AGL in May of 2024, and we kicked off construction in June of 2024. Starting in January of this year, we moved into the second replacement zone. So that's the South Central replacement zone. And part of the goal of the contractor is to figure out the inventory of the service lines across the city by the fall of this year. So here's just some stats of where we are right now. So there's been about 1,900 properties that have been verified since mid-February. Those verifications between lead or non-lead are tracking pretty closely to our model. On the right, there's a snapshot of the public-facing inventory. If you'll recall last year, that had a lot more red in it. It's now mostly green because we have removed any properties that were constructed post-1960. So then, additionally in that table below, there's 6,100 properties that will be verified. The assumption for lead, non-lead was about 25%, or for assumed lead or galvanized was about 25% of that. So far, we're tracking pretty closely to what we expected. The goal is to replace all lead or galvanized steel service lines within 5 years. We're trending to do that more likely within 3 years of the start of the program. So the scope of work for AGL would be, again, to physically verify service line material for any property built prior to 1960, replace the 3,000 lines that we're estimating as lead or galvanized steel. They engage with customers, meaning that they are in customers' homes for a pre-construction consultation for every single lead service line or galvanized steel replacement, as well as during construction, they have to enter those customers' homes. So there's quite a bit of engagement with customers. They will also install meter pits where there is not one. So if it's a flat rate customer or an inside set meter, meter pits will be installed. And then the two bullets here below are new things that we've added since starting their contract, which is to install insertion valves and replace aging water mains. So as you'll recall, last month we brought in an amendment to the SRF loan agreement to add these two items to the loan. This is in support of the lead program. There's the insertion valves are very important to the system we're finding. It helps control the distribution system and helps with redundancy moving forward. So these will be permanent assets that AGL is installing. We're going ahead and installing these before we get to certain areas of the lead line replacement to ensure that the system can be controlled with these new valves. Oh, and I'll just mention that as of this morning, there were 654 service line replacements completed. So AGL was selected through a competitive bid process last year. The RFP was posted in January 2024. This is just what their how their price compared to the other contractors that bid. AGL, as a part of our negotiation last year, confirmed that they would hold pricing throughout the program. So we will continue to have a single family lead replacement cost of about $7,000, and then the commercial replacement cost is about $8,500. So for the program year for 2025, we are sticking with what we had presented last year, which is about $10.45 million. We did not use any piece of the staff managed contingency that was also requested. So we would again request the $2.8 million as staff managed contingency as a part of this program. We anticipate if 3,000 lead lines are found that next year we would again renew with AGL for $8.25 million. With that, I will open it up for any questions.
I would like to ask a question. On the 3,000 anticipated, have we been finding any that were not, and they had already been changed out prior? When you dig and find, I mean, because I've had some people call me and tell me that they had copper changed a long time ago.
So actually what we are finding, and this is as a result of the way that we're potholing, is we're actually potholing at the water main in the street. And what we're finding is of those potholes, there's about 10%, 10 to 11% of those potholes are coming back where the other two pothole locations show a copper line, but right at the connection to the street, it's still a lead or galvanized line. And what we think happened, and probably happened over the course of the last several decades, is a service line would be replaced to the point where just under the walk, but not into the street. And so people may have changed their line, and what the contractor or plumber would have done is they would have connected to that last little piece of lead or galvanized that is 8 or 10 feet from the point where they get under the sidewalk to the main in the street. And so there's a residual piece that's left. And by potholing in the street at the main, we're going to ensure that we clear out all of those. And I think it was a little bit of a surprising number that 10 to 11% of what we thought were going to be copper lines still have that residual piece left. And that those are, I guess that's where you're probably hearing people is like, we changed it, it's copper. But we're finding that, there are a number of people who have this last little piece that we're taking out.
Did the city keep records back then? Don't you think that if they had to have permission, right, even from the street to the house?
So a lot of times, so city records is, somewhat of a challenge just overall. I mean, I think there's a lot of systems that the city has that the records have long since disappeared, or they were hard copy, or they were never kept, or they were never documented, because there weren't procedures to actually take an as-built and then put it into a city record. And then as we're talking about like the owner side of it, I mean, that ultimately becomes an ownership record of the homeowner at that point in time. So as we're moving forward, we're creating the record for a lot of this. And so we're creating a comprehensive record that looks at all homes pre-1960. And that's a documented electronic database record so that anybody can access that information. Were the records kept? Maybe, but if they were, they have long since disappeared.
So are we keeping track when citizens call and tell us that they think their lines are copper? I mean, what you just shared with me tells me that we still need to dig in the street by the water main to make sure, but is it getting documented that they have copper lines, or you don't necessarily document that until you do the...
Well, so we do actually through that model. So that initial potholing activity just looked at either side of the meter pit or either side of the shutoff valve. We actually added that last point as when we started executing the project, because as we were talking about it, we were thinking about, well, what about people who think they have a copper line but have this last little 6, 8, 10-foot piece of lead? We need to make sure we get all those out. So everybody that had a pothole before and it was confirmed non-lead, we're going back and we're taking that last pothole to verify that it's not non-lead at the street. So that all homes pre-1960 will have 3 pothole locations, one at the street, one just on the city side of the shutoff of the curb stop or the meter pit, and then one on the homeowner side of the service line itself. And that, I think, is about as comprehensive a record as we can establish for all the homes that are pre-1960. Post-1960 are not lead lines.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Any further questions?
Chair?
Go ahead.
So I have some questions about execution of the project, just in general. The first question is, and I ask these questions because this activity is occurring in my neighborhood right now where I live. What's our procedure for notifying homeowners that there will be activity, or that there will be parking closures, or that there will be disruption in the neighborhood prior to that actually occurring?
So everybody should receive a door hanger that lets the residents in the area know that AGL is imminently planning on being in that neighborhood. Backing up before that, everybody should have gotten a postcard in advance of us even entering into a new zone, saying that, this is coming, please reach out with questions. We also host open houses and have those dates specified on the postcard. So everybody in that new zone, we've since opened 2 zones, should have received at least a postcard, and then, the door hanger right before AGL enters.
Yeah, I can directly confirm receipt of the postcard. Cannot say whether or not I actually got a door hanger. The other question is, what's the timeline for the door hangers? How much notification are we giving residents?
It's typically the week before.
Okay.
They enter.
Okay. And then my second question related to the same issue is, how often are we having city staff travel with the crews or inspect their work or look at the job site and make sure that it's compliant with what we require and what we expect as a city?
So as a part of the program manager with Hazen, program management contract with Hazen, there are representatives that are at every single line replacement and making sure that it is up to our standards. The other thing that we will do as a part of the closeout of a zone is we will go around and ensure that all warranty issues are addressed. Any customer outstanding issues have been addressed before we would ever close that zone.
I'll also just add to that, there are also areas of the city that we need to have a historic preservation monitor or cultural monitor, because our state historic preservation office has outlined areas where we need to have someone on site when we're digging to ensure that we're not disrupting some cultural artifact as part of the construction. So most of these activities, because we don't have the in-house staff resources to send, to dedicate people for 3 years full-time to something. So most of these resources are what the program management role does through Hazen. And so they're administering the program, they're administering the open houses, they're administering the sending out of the information, all that notification, as well as the inspection to ensure that what is being installed meets our standards, meets our expectation, and then the closeout. And then we, as a staff, direct and guide and meet and spot check and confirm with the program managers, confirming that the contractor is executing.
Great, thank you.
Any further questions?
Actually, Chair, if I could add one more thing.
Yeah.
So on this, and I'd like to thank Councilmember Ward for bringing this to our attention. So the Councilmember Ward noticed that a number of the signs had graffiti on them, and the graffiti's getting pretty bad. And so we've notified the contractor. They're in the process of cleaning or removing those signs and replacing them. And so as this is moving through and touching basically every street in the city, if you're seeing things that are like the graffiti or issues with notification or something like that, please bring it to our attention, because we can immediately let the program manager know, we can immediately let AGL know, and we can usually get these things fixed fairly quickly. They're focused on digging a hole, line, digging a hole, line, digging a hole, and sometimes those other things get somewhat forgotten. But as you're seeing those, bring them to our attention, because they will get them resolved, and we will make sure they get them resolved. So I want to just thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Thank you, and I'll note that did happen today within probably 6 hours of it being reported. They were out there first trying to clean it up and then realized it was kind of a futile effort, so they removed it.
Very good. All right. Could I get a motion to approve item 5A as written?
So moved. Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
All right, just confirm that one person opposed? Was that last vote in opposition or in favor? Maybe I even had an echo on the phone. I think it's clear to say the motion carries. Thank you very much. 5B, Adam, I think we're turning it over to you. Right. Oh, did I lose connection?
Nope, we hear you.
Okay.
We're just getting seated.
Okay. I don't have the camera views on myself. I start thinking my thing went dead. All right, thank you.
Yep. Good evening, everyone. My name is Adam Marquez. Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Adam Marquez, and this item is the Solids Handling Improvements Project, GMP2 for construction services. So we presented this slide to the board last month. This is an overview of our utilities facility project delivery for the near future. Our plan is to execute, we have executed 2 CMGC agreements with PCL Construction. And this item is GMP2 within the Solids Handling Improvements Project. The intent, of course, is that these 2 projects are physically adjacent to each other and overlap from a schedule standpoint. So quick refresh on the background of this project. So solids are removed as part of our treatment process. They drain to our wash water pump station, which then is pumped to our south reservoir where they accumulate and collect. Previously, we had a belt filter press to remove the solids and convey them over to a drying bed for passive dewatering. The dewatered sludge was then hauled off to a landfill for final disposal. So the purpose of this project is to replace the belt filter press, which is past its useful life. By doing so, we hope to address taste and odor compounds as the South Reservoir does recycle to the North Reservoir, which is one of our water treatment plant intakes. So removing the solids hopefully addresses some of our taste and odor compounds. The timeline for the project, we contracted with PCL for pre-construction services last year. We reached our 100% design milestone in January of this year. And just last month, we executed the first work package, GMP1, which allowed us to early procure long lead equipment. And then finally, the centrifuge will be arriving from Centrifuge in May of this year, which is when construction will begin. We hope to be wrapped up by the end of the summer so we can start removing solids again. So the scope of the work for the project is the demolition of the belt filter press and replacement with the centrifuge. We will also need to retrofit the existing building, including the conveyor in the photo, to basically match the elevations of the new centrifuge and also match the speed of the new centrifuge because it is faster. PCL will install the centrifuge and install the new process piping as well as electrical equipment to support it. And then startup and testing. So this is a look at the GMP2 contract. So we've got the direct work activities, their project staff and general conditions for doing some of the field engineering and processing all the submittals. We've got money for bonds and insurance, taxes and permits. We have some allowances, including, potential support to rehab our existing dredge. We are planning to reuse our existing dredge. It's in working order, but in case it needs some maintenance, we have an allowance, and then contractor contingency, and then finally their markups. So the total GMP2 cost is $1.4 million. So our recommendation is for approval of $1.4 million for the GMP2 amount plus a 10% staff managed contingency for a total project authorization of $1.54 million. Any questions?
Doesn't sound like it.
No, actually, I do have a question, Chair.
Okay,
So,
go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm just trying to go back. So there was a history behind this process before, right? We were using a contractor over the past couple of years on this process.
Yes.
It seems like this has come up a couple times. I'm just trying to figure out the history on this.
Yeah, the solids handling project, it's been a series of work activities and contracts. We've been through the design process. We bought the centrifuge back in January of 2024, I believe. And before that, we had hired BioVelocity, who was basically trying to get us caught up on removing solids from the South Reservoir because the belt filter press was just too slow to keep up with the plant's production. And so now, because we've been in this procurement and design and finally construction process, we did not remove solids last year. So again, once we get the centrifuge up and running, we hope to get caught up.
Yeah, so just a clarification. So the BioVelocity bought us some time.
Yeah.
So we are well exceeding the amount of volume of solids that should be in that south pond. And that's actually one of the big contributors to our taste and odor issues. And so we hired BioVelocity to carve out as much available volume as possible to give us some time to go through this process to build a centrifuge process, because the belt filter press process can't keep up. And so 2 years of while we're designing and procuring a permanent long-term solution that will ultimately be a centrifuge, which is what BioVelocity used to pull the solids out. And then that sets us up long-term to not get in this position where we're sending more solids to the pond than the dewatering system is pulling out. And so we still have a lot of catch-up to do, because there's still a lot of solids in the pond, and we're looking at various options, including the potential of potentially draining that reservoir and using front-end loaders to pull a bunch of it out. We still have to work through the details of that, but what this does is it sets us up long-term so we don't get into this situation again.
Yeah, Peter, I just recall that we've talked about the solids aspect of it for quite a few times in the past, and just trying to get a handle of where we're at on that, so.
Yeah, so we're at that point now of where this is the construction to actually construct the permanent long-term solution.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you, Peter.
Yep.
Any further questions? All right, can I get a motion to approve item
Actually, there-
5B as, oh,
Chair, there is another
Sorry.
question.
Yeah, there's another question.
please go ahead.
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to congratulate you guys. This has been a long journey, and I'm very proud of you guys. I'm personally very excited about this part. But I have a couple of questions. First of all, I want to apologize. I was really stuck in a parking lot. First of all, and I know you guys had contractors to remove some of these debris, but from your guesstimation of what's happening, what do you guesstimate that how the debris that is left in there, how fast you, with the new system, you will remove what has built up? Two, my question is that, so this has been accumulated through many years. So how does that affect the microbiome as you're digging out and exposing? Is that something that you guys are considering, or is that something that we should consider? Or is that something like we have to monitor on a monthly basis as debris are getting exposed and coming to the surface?
So the first question is, what do we think the time is for once we get the centrifuge in? A lot of it depends on staffing and the duration with which we can, if we run it 24/7, 365 days a year, it might take a couple years. If we run it based on staffing a lesser amount, it could take, potentially 3 or 4 years to get the full volume back and get us stabilized to where now the amount that we're putting in can be exceeded by the amount that we dewater with the new system. So if you back up, it's taken decades to get to the point where this thing is so full. If we can get it cleared out in the next couple of years with a new system, and this is the same system we have at South Platte. We have 3 of these centrifuges. They spin all the time, and that's, we run solids out of there all the time. So this is the same type of equipment, spinning water out of solids, and then we'll haul them off. We're also looking at that other option of potentially just draining the reservoir and utilizing front-end loaders to pull out as much of that solid as possible to give us, again, a jump start so that when we put the centrifuge online, we're not continuing to perpetuate being behind. The second piece about the biome, I assume you're talking about the South Reservoir. So the South Reservoir is actually designed to be a solids holding pond where half of it holds the solids, and then the water that has that solids in it has time to drift over to the east. Everything settles out. It's clean water at that point in time that then is run through our ozone system and then back into the North Reservoir. As far as that biome of that South Reservoir, it's designed to be a kind of a big, process vessel. It's like a process vessel, essentially. It's handling the solids aspect of the process. Now, there are geese that, sit on it. There are ducks that are on it. There's carp in it. So we pay attention to that, realizing that it is still fundamentally a process system. And so to the degree we can minimize the disruption to that wildlife, we'll do that. Also recognizing that we need to get the solids out of the thing so that we return it back to the way that it was originally designed to work, so that we don't end up with this short circuiting of those contaminants ending back up in the water plant.
Yeah, I apologize, because I thought my perception was that eventually the sod part needs to be cleaned because it gets full eventually, correct?
Yeah, well, it shouldn't ever get full again. I mean, that's the whole thing, is because what happened is the rate at which the solids were being pulled out of the reservoir was slower than the rate at which the solids were being introduced to the river. And so over time, they accumulated, and this is over decades, accumulated to the point where there's a curtain wall that separates the solids impact of the reservoir and the clear impact of the reservoir. And that curtain wall has been pushed all the way over because the solids have pushed all the way into that clear area.
Yeah.
That's part of what's contributing to our taste, odor, and hardness, or taste and odor short circuiting. That's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to get that return so there's two bays of that south pond. And then once everything's cleared out, it should never pile back up again to this degree.
And so your prediction is that, like, once this is functioning, we can actually there is a light at the end of the tunnel the first year or something.
There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and I am hopeful that light at the end of the tunnel is within the next 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
I might be optimistic in that time frame because there's a lot of solids in that reservoir. But I think if we do this right and we get really efficient at pulling it out and trucking it off and things like that, we can return this back to the way it was originally designed and intended when it was built decades ago.
Thank you so much. I look forward to that as well. Thanks.
Any further questions or discussion? Okay, can I get a motion for item 5B as written?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, hearing none, motion carries. All right, item 5C. And I'm sorry, I just lost my agenda. Boreas Pass. Somehow I just ended up on page 1884 on my packet.
Is it a contract term?
So I think Chris Edelstein's taking it, right?
You are correct. Chris Edelstein.
Okay.
I'm the Environmental Compliance Coordinator for Utilities. Here to discuss a proposed Eagle Scout project agreement for some maintenance on the Boreas number 2 ditch. So just a little bit of overview on the ditch. On a straight line, it's about 6 miles southeast of Breckenridge. So we're right on the Continental Divide. I apologize, it's a little bit lighter than I anticipated. The ditch does have sections that are piped. We have pipe, and then sections that are open channel. On there, we also have infrastructure. So we have head gates that allow water. When the ditch is not in service, we open those up so that way the water continues to flow on the western side of the slope. So as soon as we can get up there in the spring, hopefully mid-June or earlier, we close those gates and start directing water through the ditch and then through the pipe to get into Chatfield eventually. With this ditch, we do have some woody vegetation that's starting to grow. We have debris. There is a hiking trail along there, so it's always fun to throw things in water, including stumps. So it'll come through The Eagle Scouts will be removing the stumps. They'll be taking out the vegetation just to kind of give us a little bit of a clearer path. Obviously, trees will absorb that water, so we're trying to keep as much water in the ditch as possible. Also, part of the ditch, it's kind of crude in parts of it, so it's just you take the material out and they've kind of pushed it on the downstream slope. So in the early spring, when we get a lot of runoff, we do have some erosion problems, so they'll go in there with shovels and get the bank restored as well. No power equipment, it's all going to be handheld shovels, rakes, clippers to be able to do this work. So this is Troop 188. Donovan Ramy is on the far right-hand side. He is the one that's proposing the project. He reached out to us last July, but he's actually in Switzerland right now for a year abroad. So he just ran out of time to get all the approvals before he had to leave. So we're going to try again and get it taken care of this spring. So with this, it's about 100 hours of service from them. They'll be removing the debris, vegetation, and the simple bank repairs. They will supply all of the tools necessary for the work, and then the Boy Scouts of America also cover the liability insurance for the volunteers while they're out there working. And with that, any questions?
I have a question. With the bank repairs, do you need any kind of permitting from the state to do any of that?
No, it is on U.S. Forest Service land, but we're inside of our easement, so there's no permits required for that. We're just maintaining existing infrastructure.
This might not be an important question, but do you guys ever get beaver problems up there on the path?
Not up there, no. This will run dry. So typically we can run water from June to early September, late August. But no, it's high enough that there's no beaver meadows up there.
Is it great? This is close to 10,000 feet. Is that right?
It's slightly over 10,000.
Yeah. So this is right up at the top of Boreas Pass, and it's actually our only physical trans-basin diversion that takes it from the west slope to the east slope, and generally this generates about 150 acre feet a year of water for the city's portfolio. So it's an important aspect of our system, and it's great. It's really actually pretty awesome that an Eagle Scout decided that this would be a cool service project for us. So we're really excited about it.
Any other questions? All right, could I get a motion to approve item 5C as written?
So moved.
Seconded.
Great. Any further discussion? I'll just myself add that echo Peter's comments. Really neat that the Eagle Scouts are doing this. It's very generous. Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
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 I'm going to go on a limb and say there won't be any opposition, but anyone opposed? All right, motion carries. We have no old business tonight. Move on to staff's choice.
Hi, good evening. I'm Deputy City Attorney Victoria McDermott, and I'm here to address an important meeting administration matter, which is the process of electing the chair and vice chair, and whether the board should adopt bylaws to clarify election timing and term limits. So currently the process for electing a chair and vice chair is informal. The city charter gives this board the authority to elect its own chair and vice chair, but it does not specify when elections should take place or how long a chair may serve. The city's board and commission handbook does include a section providing guidance on electing a chair and a vice chair, but that section applies to boards created by the city council, not to charter-created boards like this one. So why does this matter? Without clear guidelines, leadership transitions can be uncertain and expectations may not be consistent over time. Formalizing the process could help ensure stability, transparency, and continuity in leadership. So there are 3 options for consideration. The first would be to continue the current practice. The board can keep electing its chair and vice chair on an informal basis as it has in the past. The risk with doing so, though, would be we wouldn't have clear rules and uncertainty may arise over leadership transitions and term limits. The second option would be to adopt bylaws. The board can establish formal election procedures, such as an annual election cycle, with elections perhaps being held at the first meeting of the calendar year. It can set term limits for the chair and vice chair, such as 2 or 4 year consecutive terms, or consecutive years with a required break before a member can serve again. And then the third option would be the board can ask City Council to pass a measure setting election rules for this board by ordinance or resolution. So what we're asking for tonight is for direction in the with respect to what option the board would like to pursue. Our office, the city attorney's office recommendation is to adopt bylaws to clarify election timing, term limits, and procedures. With that, I will turn it over to any questions.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
What do other similar boards do or have?
Sure. So there are 4 boards that are charter created. The Planning and Zoning Commission is another charter created board, and they do have bylaws.
And the other 2, Vicky, do what? They're informal like us?
So the other 2, there's the library board and then the Board of Adjustment of Appeals, and they are either informal or while the Boarding Commission handbook does not specifically address their procedures, they align themselves with the processes outlined in that.
Okay.
Was the first board you were talking about, was it planning and zoning?
Yes, the Planning and Zoning is one of the other charter created boards, and that they do have bylaws.
Okay, thank you.
Vicky, what do their bylaws provide?
Their bylaws provide, I believe, sorry, I don't have those up in front of me, but I believe they are, that's the first meeting of the calendar year is when elections take place. And I believe, if I am remembering it correctly, as I am trying to pull it up, it's 2 consecutive years for chair and vice chair.
Just, all right, 2 years in tow, okay.
One thing,
go ahead.
One thing I would just want to add is that the Water Sewer Board, your term limits are longer than some of our other boards and commissions. It is 6 years, and you can have 3 consecutive terms. So in theory, a member of the Water Sewer Board can serve for 18 years. So one thing to consider would perhaps, with any formal process, would be having a longer term length for a leadership position.
Recognizing that
board members can serve longer than that too, based on where they started. I'm sorry, who was someone adding?
Yeah, that's me, Chair. Councilman Ward.
Yeah.
Recognizing that the city attorney's office doesn't recommend it, is the status quo an option? Can we just keep doing what we're doing?
Yes, the status quo is entirely an option.
I'll add some color to this. We started having a discussion about needing to elect the chair and looking at the handbook versus what our past practice has been, and so that we started digging into this, and so Vicky's given us a good history. The standard procedure on the calendar for most boards would be, chairs serve. I forget if you said it was annual elections, but you can serve 2 terms. Our board does have some added challenges that I'll add, that I'll make sure are out there. So first of all, a third of our board are council members, and my understanding is they can't or shouldn't serve as chair. So I'm happy to have that challenge, but I don't believe a council member would be in that position. So our board, we have to pick from the rest of us, from 2/3. So that's one, that, and combined with our longer term limits and the complexity of our issues, are reasons why I'll say I think frequent turnover of the chair position may not be best served. So we wanted to put that out for the board's consideration, and whether we just want to continue to go ad hoc. Our last election was after the chair, the chair opened up. I personally am in favor of, whether we formalize it in bylaws or just start more of a practice. I think the process of doing the the election every year, or just the confirmation of it, makes sense. But the personally, I think the 2-year rotation is probably would make it difficult for the board to keep the seat filled, or willingly anyway. So those are just kind of my thoughts on the matter. I certainly am not advocating that we, follow the board, the guidelines for boards that are, not ours, in doing it that way. But that's kind of where we wanted to get the board's input and how you guys want to handle this. I'll volunteer to say, I mean, it is, I think regardless, it's time for us to kind of look at it and confirm. I'm happy to serve. I'm happy to step aside. That's the secondary issue to whether we need to drive force a rotation in a specific period of time.
I have a comment / maybe a question.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about creating bylaws, we could make them our own, right? Like we can, if we want this if the chair limits to be a certain length, we can do that. We don't have to copy and paste what another board is doing.
No, well, yes, that's absolutely correct. You don't have to copy and paste what another board is doing. We would just need to make sure whatever bylaws were adopted were consistent with city charter and city code.
So it sounds like we have some flexibility if we want to adopt bylaws to do what we want.
So was P&Z's bylaws, was it dictated in the charter?
No, not specifically. It was not part of the enabling charter requirements for setting up P&Z. It is, I believe, part of our municipal code that allows for the setting of each board to kind of create their own rules and procedures.
So do we know when P&Z instituted that?
I do know that they most recently revised their bylaws last year, but I'd have to go back through our records to see when the first bylaws were adopted.
Okay, thank you.
I think there is. I will suggest, council members, there is I think your input is key in terms of if you were wanting to drive more to the other boards, or also, with having served on this board, if you're recognizing there's a difference that you'd want to keep. But I'm not sure. I'm trying to think where to go with this. If anyone's has a strong desire to go a certain direction, we can pursue that. I'm not. If we were to choose not to do anything specific, in others, not pursue the bylaw change, but just or informal, then probably what I would do is put on the agenda for our next meeting to elect or re-elect the chair and vice chair, and then as a go-forward matter, I think I typically do it in this February. The first meeting after we've seated new members in the usual cycle. So whether within the February meeting would be our normal time, but I would suggest we just kind of revisit that decision. But I don't know if no one has a strong opinion tonight, what we can just do for now is bring it back up next week or next meeting and see if there are any further thoughts on it, but floor's still open if there's any more discussion.
Chair, the vice chair has his hand up.
Hi, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add, I've been around quite a few water and sewer boards, and I had the opportunity to work with the city of Greeley's. They have no term limits, and that applies to both members and the chair. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have term limits, but I do think there is some value in that long-term continuity in the chair position. I think it has helped them establish a really solid board and keep that institutional knowledge. Just some food for thought I wanted to add as we kind of consider what to do here and, ponder what other municipalities do and why.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Then I'll, not hearing any more, I will put a follow-up agenda item for next month in case anyone has further thoughts, and just kind of, if nothing else, reconfirm our positions for now. Okay, if that's it, Peter, back to you.
Thank you, Chair. So we have tonight an informational item that we wanted to present, which is essentially we've been spending a lot of time on taste, odor, and hardness, and there's been a lot of work that's been occurring in the background, and we wanted to give you an update of some of those results of some of that effort. So I've got Zach Alabassi, who is our water treatment manager and operations and treatment manager. Basically, Zach is the one who has gone through the Ellen plant and figured out how to optimize the processes and chemical additions in a way that really has had an impact on the water that we're sending out to our customers, and it's a positive impact. And so he's here as well, because if you start asking me technical treatment questions, I am probably going to quickly get over my skis and have to turn it over to him. So, but we'll go through some of the things that we've done. So historically, I think what we're all aware of this. Water, taste, odor, and hardness has been an issue for the city of Englewood. It's one of our most common feedback points is the taste of the water, and the hardness is really actually something that people often talk about. So there's also been in there some concerns about water safety, because if the water has taste and odor to it, sometimes that translates to, is there something wrong with the water? Just to reaffirm that we do all kinds of testing of the water, both at the plant and throughout the system, to ensure that it meets all of the water quality standards set by the EPA and CDPHE. So from a safety perspective, that's not the issue here. From an aesthetics perspective, that has been a long-term challenge. So initially, it was hard to figure out where the source came from. That's where Zach and staff have really worked hard to start to diagnose where the problems are coming from. And we talked about the South Reservoir. That is one of our biggest problem areas in terms of contributing to taste and odor. If you look at lack of proactive response strategy, when we let the South Reservoir fill up for 35 or 40 years, that's a lack of a proactive strategy that then results in a challenge from an operational perspective. And then I think you go to the bottom of underinvestment. We've talked about that. We have done a lot of work to correct that, and through the increase in staffing, the funding, the federal funds, the state funds that we've accessed, we are in a transformational period for this utility. So what are we doing? We are looking at taste and odor on all water streams. We've talked about South Reservoir. We'll get into that a little bit more. We've also realized that there's some infrastructure configuration that has always been there that for years hasn't been utilized. And one of these is a direct flow from the city ditch into the plant. And so we actually uncovered some of that system to determine how it was configured, and have been able to change the way we are blending source water. Like I said, Zach and staff have gone step by step through all these treatment processes to optimize them, to ensure that what we're doing with one process isn't counteracting what a process downstream needs to be doing. And I think there was some of that where the plant to some degree was actually fighting itself because of the way we were dosing chemicals. And the water at the end was, still treated and safe. It's just some of these optimizations take away those compounds that create that taste and odor issue. And then we've talked about staffing and funding that we've done a lot of work on. So let's talk about source water. So source water, we've done a lot of characterization of our source water, and you can see from the graphs in the upper right that 47% of in 2023, 47% of the water, raw water, was coming from city ditch. We bumped that to 82%, and so where it says river, that's at the diversion at Union Ave directly off the South Platte. So we were using more diversion from South Platte, less diversion from city ditch. When we flipped it to more city ditch, less diversion from the South Platte at Union, what we were finding was, and we somewhat knew this, is that the water that comes from Chatfield has less just impact from urbanization, urban runoff, all the things that impact the Platte between Chatfield Reservoir and Union Avenue. And by accessing more of that water upstream, farther upstream near Chatfield, means it's better source water. This again is part of the rationale significant rationale for piping the entire city ditch. We eliminate any of that influence of street runoff. We are able to close the system such that whatever water is at Chatfield is the same water that ends up at the plant. And so additionally, there was, we piloted and utilized this, what's called an ozone system, and it's a trailer that we purchased. And essentially what that does is that utilizes ozone to knock down those compounds between when the water moves from the south reservoir to the north reservoir. And so there was this short circuiting cycle that water would come out of the plant with the treated, treating all the solids out of the plant. It would go into the south reservoir. The south reservoir was more than full with solids. So that would kick those solids all the way over to the intake where the water then went back to the north reservoir. And then the north reservoir is the source of where it goes back into the plant. So we're just doing this circular process that's getting rid of the solids in the south plant is going to help tremendously. But in the meantime, this addition of ozone to disrupt that process between the south reservoir and the north reservoir knocks a number of those compounds down. So by analyzing where the challenges were coming from, we're able to place the treatment technology in the right place to have the maximum effect. Now, the great thing about it being on a trailer is as we start to fix the south reservoir and potentially make modifications to the north reservoir, we can take this trailer to other locations to help further address taste and odor if we find that maybe there's issues that we want to address at the Union Ave pump station, or so that flexibility of that trailer and the ability to bring it in has really been substantial. And I'm not exactly, I think it's nanograms per liter. Is that right? Okay. So those are really small grams per liter. And you can see the ozone has taken it from 66 to 5.1, 19 to 5, and 19 to 4.8. So you can see it's not just a small drop. It's a significant drop in those compounds. So that's one area. Sludge removal. We've talked a bit about this. I'll just touch on it again. Getting that sludge out of that south pond, putting in that centrifuge, and staying caught up with sludge is really going to help pull those compounds permanently out of the cycle of the system so that they don't get reintroduced over and over again. Distribution system. We have gone through the distribution system and found areas where the water is maybe potentially stagnant because it's a long run. It doesn't have a lot of demand on it. So we've increased our hydrant flushing more than just the once a year for a couple weeks to locate these locations where maybe the water just needs to be freshened up by flushing out the line. And so because we now have a distribution system model, we can model where we think these points are and then go back operationally, send our crews out there periodically through the year to help get fresher water into those lines. Additionally, the way the overhead tanks work, so operators want to keep tanks full. And the reason why I keep tanks full is because if you have a fire or something, you want to be able to make sure that there's the maximum amount of water available. Well, if you keep tanks full, what happens is the water stratifies and you end up with water that stays near the top that's, older water, and then the water that gets introduced into the tank then comes back out. And so what we did, because we do want to keep tanks full, we don't want to draw them way down to the point where we have less volume of water available, is we put in tank mixers. And what those tank mixers do is they actually de-stratify that water so that we're getting good mixing through that water in a way that you don't have these stagnated layers of water in those tanks that further then create challenges through the water system, through the system. So we've added tank mixers throughout the distribution system. So looking at hardness, and this goes a lot to source water and finished water, the finished water from 23 to 24. So 23 is the orange line, and 24 is the bluish green line. And if you recall from that graph, that chart early on, that's when we moved from 47% city ditch water to 82%. And you can see the effect it has on hardness. And especially during like the spring or during high runoff episodes, when you get high runoff episodes, if you recall the Big Dry Creek project, what that was trying to do is trying to divert the high runoff that was potentially coming from Big Dry Creek. We went back and reassessed, and we've postponed that project till later because we think there could be some value to that project down the road. However, you can see what just changing the way we utilize our source water and our source system, the stabilizing effect it has on hardness. So we're running, at peaks near 350, down to staying pretty steady between 130 and 200. Now, still higher than we want to be, but if we can stabilize it at a lower level, then we can look at a potential softening process or something that knocks that down a little bit more to get it into a range, as opposed to a softening process that's trying to address water that's at the 350 or 400 level. We're just now, for lack of a better term, kind of polishing that water down to a much more acceptable range, which is something we'd look to do in the next few years as we stabilize how the water hardness reacts through the change in the source. But this is actually, these graphs are one of the things that excited me about, the work that Zach has done to illustrate that, we've heard anecdotal stories from our customers that, yes, they are seeing an improvement. This graph shows that there is actually a data-backed improvement. Now, it's not where we want to be yet, but we've made substantial improvement in that variability of hardness, and it's pretty stable and it's gotten lower. And so if you look at where we're at right now, we're probably still in that, we're in that slightly to moderately hard range, probably more in the moderately hard. So we want to move, we want to get a little bit lower. I think ultimately long term, if we really want to get to a point where the water is below, is a hardness level that I think people are normally accepting normally. But again, we have to balance that with what's that going to cost from a softening process and a long-term chemical usage process and things like that. But if we're only trying to knock it down another 20 or 30, what's the units on hardness? Milligrams per liter, that we would be looking to, instead of trying to knock it down 200, we're trying to knock it down 20, 30, which, is easier in a smaller system long term. So moving forward, so you can see kind of the road where we've been and where we're going. So we've, in summary, you can see that we're taking a holistic approach to this, and we're looking at all aspects of the system to try and address this, because it's not just one thing. It's a number of things that build on themselves that ultimately create this problem. And then ultimately, I think the one of the most significant projects that we are underway with is that piping a city ditch. I think I had mentioned before that it is delayed because we couldn't come to pricing terms with our CMGC contract. That project is actually out to bid right now. And there is interest from the market, from the construction market. We just had a meeting a couple days ago, yesterday, where a number of construction firms did show interest in the project. So we're hopeful that we're going to get much more competitive pricing. And then there's still that middle reach that we're redesigning because of the railroad issue. But so it's delayed sitting ditch from where we thought we would be right now. And that was an acceptable delay because we think we're going to save a significant amount of money in the millions in order to execute it this way. So it's weighing delay with cost, and we think that this is the appropriate approach. So I think overall, I want to, I'm going to go back to this slide. So I want to recognize, I really do want to recognize Josh and Zach and the staff at the Allen plant and the staff we brought online and Ryan Ratcliffe and Travis Skurlock, who are managers in operations as well, because they have all looked at this and said, how can we holistically try to make things better? And it's not just ad hoc, go here and whack-a-mole and things like that. There's a strategy to it. And so I think the findings and the results are what we're starting to see, that strategy is starting to pay off. And we just wanted to provide an update to the board and answer any potential questions that you may have. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you. Floor is open if anyone has comments or questions.
Chair. Councilman Ward. Does the algae in the North Reservoir have any benefit, or is it just an annoyance that we've never addressed in the past?
Yeah, just push that button.
It actually, for us, it's a problem because algae tends quite often tends to release toxins, and those, in other words, can cause taste and odor. If you recall the slide that shows where we've had PAC and then ozone. So some of those compounds that are pretty common to use taste and odor are MIB and geosmin. Those can be from runoff, can be the result of vegetation, but they're also toxins released by algae as they go through their seasonal variations through the winter and summertime. So algae is definitely not good for the aesthetics of water. It does tend to add color, it does tend to add taste and odor, among other things. So there is an item that is listed on the last slide that we're looking into, which is one is to do monitoring of the algae content in the North Reservoir. We're also looking at potentially, using a treatment approach to algae, whether it's an ultrasound or maybe a lot of utilities use copper sulfate, but the last thing we want to do is add copper to our water. So, and there is really no good or controlled way, if you will, that you can add copper sulfate to a reservoir of that size. So we're looking at one, again, quantify the problem. Two is potential treatment, at least in the summertime when we have more sunlight, higher temperatures, and the algae tend to bloom.
And I'll just add that we are not the only water provider that runs into this problem late summer, early fall. This is a common occurrence for water providers on the Front Range who have reservoirs because they just heat up through the summer and they grow algae, and this becomes a challenge.
So is cost the factor that's led us to not address it previously, or is it just something that, like so many things at that plant, slipped through the cracks over the last 3 decades?
I don't think it's cost. I think it's no one. I can't speak for the past, but I think what we are doing moving forward is we're taking a concerted effort to try and figure out what the issues are, and I think that's where we're not letting cost drive it. We're actually trying to make sure that we're finding the source and addressing the right problem, which has taken some time. But we're narrowing in on what these problems are. And when we finally get to the point where we think we have a strategy for algae, we'll bring it to the board, we'll evaluate it from a cost benefit perspective, we'll bring it to the board, we'll see what the implementation looks like. But it's not necessarily a cost driver as much as it's just, this is complicated stuff, and it takes, takes smart people like Zach to figure it out, basically.
Great, thank you. For what it's worth, I've noticed significant improvement in the taste and odor issues of the water at my house since Zach came on. So thank you for your work.
That is great to hear. Thank you.
Anything further?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So first of all, thank you for all your hard works, everybody. Zach, thank you very much. So I noticed from the last year, so the algae problem, I would imagine that around June, July, and August is a major problem because of the sun and all of that. And also, we don't have the problem with the winter, with all the salt that they're dumping on the streets, and then that, I would imagine, affects the ecology of the water. I don't know how, but I don't know if you guys keep track of that.
So if I could add one more thing on that. So nutrients is a significant contributor to algae, so phosphorus and nitrogen.
Yeah.
And so by closing city ditch, what we're doing is we're eliminating all that runoff from yards and streets that end up in city ditch that are bringing those nutrients into city ditch and then discharging into the North Reservoir, which, when you supply nutrients, an elevated level of phosphorus and nitrogen, then you end up with significant more algae. So again, this is another driver for, we're not going to eliminate it entirely, but everywhere that we can eliminate, entrance points for nutrients and contaminants into our source water by piping city ditch should have a beneficial effect at the reservoir and at the plant.
Correct. And so, but when you look at the graph that you presented to us, and as you can see that the level of the contaminants, the hardness, is kind of leveled off around like with July. Is that a contribution that is coming from removing the sludge?
This is mainly for hardness. It's mainly the use of city ditch water. So we took, if you will, our better water and brought it in either directly into the plant, but for the most part, we brought it into the North Reservoir and eventually into the treatment process.
Right.
That was done intentionally because the idea is to take city ditch water and dilute whatever contaminant levels are in the North Reservoir. In the past, the Allen Water Treatment Plant used to actually in the winter shut down the North Reservoir and rely more on river water.
Yeah.
And turn off city ditch for 6 months out of the year. Last year we did the opposite. We actually leveraged city ditch even in the winter time. So when you see some of those spikes, whether it's in the orange line or the blue line, those are either runoff events that disturb the hardness levels, or it could be us switching back and forth between city ditch and the river.
Yes.
So can I just add one clarifying point, because this is important. So taste and odor are those compounds coming from the algae, and so that's the MIB and the geosmin that Zach talked about. Hardness is minerals. Hardness is that dissolved solids.
This graph has actually no effect on what we're seeing on these other graphs.
Right. It's the taste and the odor is the algae and those compounds like geosmin and MIB. Hardness is runoff from streets and the mineral content and
so
the
therefore
devolved
the river,
salts.
Yeah, it has less of the hard
Exactly.
hardness because you're using the okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, because that's the important thing. So we characterize them taste, odor, and hardness because all three of them are a challenge.
Right.
Taste and odor sit in one bucket. Hardness sits in another bucket, and the hardness is you do that. You handle that by a process by which you pull those salts or those minerals out, which then creates a brine, which means there's when you do a softening process, there's a long-term brine stream that we have to deal with, that we have to do something with. And so
you almost read my mind, Peter, now after this many
glad
years.
it could help.
I really appreciate it. But so part of this journey of the ecology, this is ecology of the algae and bacteria and all of that, that's what you're, I don't want to say struggle, but you're processing and trying to figure that out because this is just a moving data, constantly changing.
Yeah, it's a biological system.
That's why I was saying that I'm very excited about that the sludge being removed because I would imagine that will make the ecology more predictable and then also affecting. But can I also see if you can consider looking at some of the frequencies for treating the algae and the bacteria? There's technology out there that is related to frequencies.
You mean the ultrasound? The ultrasonic
Ultrasound
frequency.
is one of more advanced technologies out there.
So we actually have had providers come out who have, it's an ultrasonic frequency and it disrupts the cellular wall of the algae. And so that's a way
You
of
can be
treating
very
it.
selective
Yep.
with these.
That's and we have met with those vendors and we've talked to them. We're just not at that point yet of where we're implementing that as a possible approach. But yes, we're absolutely looking at that kind of technology as well.
And yet, I think at that point, when you're dealing with a die-off, then you have to think about how do you remove that, which in a way is good because it's not growing and expanding and dividing up and becoming more, but there's
It ends up in the solids that end up in the south reservoir that then should go through a centrifuge and they get hauled off.
That's right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any brief further questions or comments? All right. Thank you for that update, Peter.
Chair, I'll just add, we'll come back periodically on this just to see how the progress is going. And so maybe in another year or something like that, maybe do an annual update. Because I think this is good news. And if we're hearing anecdotally that there are improvements, that's good. Thank you, Chair.
That's fantastic. Last item A, just to give the board members a chance to raise any issues on their own. Does anyone have anything tonight?
Chair, I had one more thing that I wanted to add to staff's choice, and it'll be quick. I promise it'll be quick. I did want to just update the board that we, as of this week, we are caught back up on our billing cycle. So we have been behind since last August. Bills have been 2 and 3 and 4 weeks behind. We are caught up now where our Q2 and Q3 cycles are going out on schedule, and our customers should be seeing their normal billing cycle occur again. We believe we resolved the majority of the issues. We still have these one-off things that pop up, but the majority of those issues. And then because we're going to have March be on cycle, be April on cycle, and then we will on May 1st be reinstituting shutoffs and late fees. We're going to send out a mailer in April to let everybody know. That mailer will also have a section in it. If you need help paying your bill, talk to us and we will work on a payment plan. We want to work with our customers, but we can't keep this going indefinitely. So I just want to thank Sarah and her staff. They have worked tirelessly to get us this point of the recovery, and it feels like we can breathe a little bit. So I just wanted to provide that update. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. All right. Any board member choice items tonight?
I would also like to weigh in for Deputy Director Stone and her staff, and I greatly appreciate the help that she's provided to myself and some other water customers with the problems they have. So thank you very much.
I have a question in regards to billing. Have we seen an increase in overall delinquency, or are we tracking similar to what we were prior to the change in the billing system?
We haven't run those numbers specifically, but yes, anecdotally, I would say we are running higher than we would. I mean, shutoffs is that driver to say, it's time to pay your bill. And some customers do wait for that red tag or even threat of shutoff to make a payment. So there have been feedback from my staff is that there's people that have been calling and say, when are you reinstating late fees and shutoffs? I will pay my bill at that point. So I would say, yes, we are higher than typical.
Great, thank you.
Anything else? All right. Thank you, everybody. This meeting is adjourned. Have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Good evening.